Before this story starts, picture a crowded Chicago ballroom, a pregnant wife ordered out of her own seat, and a husband so certain of his power that he never asks who truly owns the table. Stay with this story, because the betrayal soon reaches far beyond a marriage and into the trains thousands of families depend on every morning. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, resilience, and second chances, and tell us what city you are listening from. Now hear the command Lucas Mercer believed Caroline would obey. Move. That seat belongs to the woman building my future. Lucas Mercer said it softly, but the command cut through the ballroom sharper than breaking glass. Beneath the chandeliers of Chicago's Lakefront Grand Hotel, 300 investors, city officials, and reporters turned toward Caroline Elise Monroe Mercer, 8 months pregnant, and seated at the family table with one hand resting over her unborn daughter. Stay with me, because the millionaire smiling beneath those golden lights believed he was removing a powerless wife from his life, when in truth he had just ordered the controlling owner of Atlas Crown Steel to surrender her chair. Outside the windows, Lake Michigan rolled black beneath the winter wind. Inside, champagne sparkled, cameras flashed, and a string quartet continued playing as though humiliation had not entered the room. Lucas stood on stage in a tailored midnight suit, broad-shouldered and polished, his blue-gray eyes bright with the confidence of a man who believed every door opened because of him. Beside him waited Delaney Shaw in a wine-red gown, her auburn hair smooth, her smile almost patient. Caroline wore ivory silk, her platinum blonde waves falling over one shoulder. Around her neck hung a small blue-black steel key her mother had given her years ago. Lucas called it an old factory trinket. Delaney had once laughed and called it junk. Mercer Structural Systems would not be standing here tonight without one extraordinary woman, Lucas announced. Caroline's breath caught before she could stop it. 7 years of revised load calculations. 7 years of midnight calls to suppliers. 7 years of introductions made quietly through the Monroe name, while Lucas believed executives simply recognized his brilliance. For one fragile second, she thought he remembered. Then he reached for Delaney's hand. She understood the future I was trying to build, he said. She never asked me to think smaller. Applause spread unevenly through the room. Caroline did not move. Her daughter kicked hard beneath her ribs. Lucas removed his wedding ring and placed it on the glass podium. Click. The sound was tiny, but in Caroline's mind it echoed like a steel joint failing under weight. My marriage has been over for months, he continued. Another lie. At breakfast, he had asked whether the baby had moved during the night. 2 nights earlier, he had promised to attend the next ultrasound. Now he looked past her as if she were part of the furniture. Delaney descended from the stage and stopped beside Caroline's chair. Her perfume smelled expensive and cold. By tomorrow, she whispered, there will not be a single place left with your name on it. Caroline looked up slowly. There were no tears in her gray-blue eyes, only recognition. Her phone vibrated inside her clutch. Beneath the table, she opened the message, controlling vote activated. The Atlas board awaits your instructions, Ms. Monroe. Across the ballroom, Atlas Crown Steel's general counsel noticed the key at her throat and went completely still. Lucas followed the man's gaze, but understood nothing. He was already imagining Delaney beside him when the 7-year Lakefront Rapid Line contract was signed. Caroline locked her phone and rose carefully. Lucas gave her a warning smile. Do not make this embarrassing. Caroline touched her daughter, then met his eyes. You already did, she said. You just have not realized who you embarrassed. 7 years earlier, Lucas Mercer owned one freezing workshop for overdue invoices and a dream too large for his bank account. Caroline met him during a Chicago Structural Engineering Expo while sleet struck the convention center windows like handfuls of nails. His booth stood near the loading doors, far from the investors and city planners he had come to impress. A bridge-joint prototype rested beneath a flickering lamp. The design was elegant. The load calculations were not. Your fatigue estimate ignores lateral vibration, Caroline said gently. Lucas looked up, offended before curiosity replaced pride. She took his pencil, corrected 3 figures, and explained why the joint would fail after years of repeated stress. 20 minutes later, a transit engineer stopped at the booth and asked for a demonstration. By sunset, Lucas had secured his first serious meeting. He bought Caroline coffee with the last cash in his wallet, and spoke about Mercer Structural Systems as though its name already stretched across the Chicago skyline. Caroline listened because ambition, before success teaches it arrogance, can resemble courage. She introduced herself as Caroline Monroe, an independent materials engineer. She did not mention Atlas Crown Steel, the private industrial empire her family had controlled for generations. She did not mention the 64% voting trust waiting beneath her name. Her mother had taught her to recognize fractures in heated metal before Caroline learned to drive. She had also warned that inheritance could make love impossible to measure. Caroline wanted one person to choose her without seeing $31 billion standing behind her. For a while, Lucas seemed to do exactly that. He remembered her coffee order, listened when she challenged him, and kissed the little blue-black steel key at her throat because it belonged to her. When creditors threatened to close his workshop, Caroline rebuilt his bidding model overnight. She corrected wasteful purchasing, removed unsafe shortcuts, and quietly introduced Mercer Structural Systems to an Atlas subsidiary through an old Monroe contact. The first contract was small, but it kept the lights on. Lucas called it proof that persistence always defeated circumstance. Caroline smiled and let him believe it. More doors opened because her recommendations were technically sound, and because executives trusted the judgment behind the Monroe name. Caroline also spent weekends riding old transit lines with veteran inspectors, listening to the sounds engineers missed from conference rooms. One of them, Raymond Ellis, had worked for Chicago Transit for 41 years. He taught her that a failing joint often announced itself first as a rhythm, a small metallic answer beneath the wheels. Lucas mocked those trips as nostalgia. Caroline considered them education. Lucas never asked why difficult meetings became easier when Caroline attended. He simply began expecting success. Then success changed the grammar of their marriage. We earned this became I built this. Our company became my vision. During interviews, Caroline was first described as his brilliant partner, then his supportive wife, then someone who preferred staying out of business. By the time she became pregnant, Lucas had rewritten 7 years of history so completely that even he believed it. When Caroline questioned rapid expansion, he called it fear. When she warned that suppliers needed deeper inspection, he called it pregnancy nerves. Delaney Shaw arrived during that widening silence, wearing black suits, perfect confidence, and the exact admiration Lucas had become addicted to hearing. She praised every dangerous shortcut as bold leadership. She laughed when Caroline mentioned long-term structural fatigue. Great men are always slowed by cautious people, Delaney said one evening. Lucas smiled. Caroline remembered that smile after the gala as she opened Mercer's archived contracts beside the dark windows of their penthouse. 6 of his 8 largest deals traced directly to relationships she had created. Even the Lakefront Rapid Line opportunity existed because her original Aegis Lock research had made Mercer eligible. Lucas had built his legend by walking through doors Caroline opened, then blamed her for standing behind him. Her phone lit with a message demanding she leave before morning. Caroline looked toward the elevated tracks cutting through Chicago's night. Something inside her did not break. It aligned, and for the first time, she wondered what else Lucas had claimed as his own. 3 days after the gala, Delaney finally revealed the price of the future she had promised Lucas. Mercer Structural Systems was running out of money faster than its accountants could hide. 2 delayed projects had trapped millions in unfinished concrete, unpaid supplier bills, and penalties that increased every morning. Lucas still appeared on business television in tailored suits, describing the company as stronger than ever. Behind closed doors, payroll was 12 days from failure. Only one opportunity could keep Mercer alive: a 7-year, $260 million contract to manufacture Aegis Lock connections for Chicago's new Lakefront Rapid Line. Delaney claimed she had already secured support inside Atlas Crown Steel. The board wants decisive leadership, she told Lucas, spreading 4 documents across his desk. Not a man distracted by a nervous wife and an unborn child. The first document was a divorce agreement. The second transferred 30% of Mercer Structural Systems to Delaney. The third removed Caroline's name from the company's earliest research records. The fourth assigned Mercer permanent ownership of Aegis Lock, the fatigue-resistant steel connection Caroline had developed years before their marriage. Lucas knew Caroline had designed something valuable. He had never asked whether it belonged to her. Once she signs, Atlas cannot question our control, Delaney said. Lucas studied the signature line. She will never agree. Delaney placed a pen beside his hand. She already did. That evening, a courier delivered the divorce package to the penthouse. Caroline sat alone in the unfinished nursery while winter wind pressed against the glass. Folded blankets waited inside the crib. A wooden nameplate reading Hope rested on the dresser, not yet mounted because Lucas had stopped discussing baby names weeks earlier. Caroline read every page slowly. The settlement offered enough money for a modest apartment and demanded permanent silence about Mercer's finances, suppliers, and research. Then she reached the patent assignment. Her signature appeared beneath Lucas's, precise enough to deceive anyone who had never watched her write. Caroline had not signed it. The document claimed she had transferred Aegis Lock 6 months earlier. Her pulse did not accelerate. It hardened. She compared the forged signature with a prenatal insurance form Lucas had insisted she complete. The curves matched exactly. Someone had copied it. Behind the assignment were material certifications for the Lakefront Rapid line. Caroline recognized the batch codes immediately. The listed alloy was Atlas certified, but the chemical composition values were wrong. 2 numbers had been altered. A third belonged to a cheaper steel with dangerously poor fatigue resistance. Caroline opened encrypted copies of her original laboratory records and compared the shipment data. The certified Atlas components had left the mill but never reached the rail project. They had been redirected to an abandoned warehouse near the Calumet River. Inferior connections had arrived under Mercer authorization. Caroline did not rely on spreadsheets alone. Before calling Margaret, she sent the batch data through Atlas's secure ethics channel and requested that Raymond be contacted through the transit authority. He still carried no corporate loyalty to Atlas or Mercer, only a duty to passengers. At dawn, he agreed to join an independent inspection team if the authority approved. A train does not care who owns the patent, he told her. It only cares whether the joint holds. Her daughter moved beneath her ribs as Caroline stared at the transit map. Platforms, elevated curves, tunnels beneath downtown. More than 100,000 passengers would trust those joints every day. Lucas had not merely stolen her invention. He had attached her name to metal that could fail beneath a moving train. Caroline closed the divorce papers and called Margaret Monroe for the first time in 7 years. "Grandmother," she said, watching the elevated tracks tremble beyond the window. "Open the furnace records. Someone is building Chicago's future with stolen steel." The gates of Atlas Crown Steel opened before Caroline's black sedan reached the security booth. Margaret had cleared her arrival in advance, yet the sight still felt impossible after 7 years away. Beyond the tinted windows, furnaces burned red against the Chicago night, while steam rolled across railway tracks and sheets of steel moved through the mill with a thunder Caroline could feel beneath her ribs. Her daughter shifted inside her, as though recognizing the rhythm that had shaped generations of the Monroe family. Margaret Elaine Monroe waited inside the original casting hall beneath iron beams darkened by nearly a century of heat. At 69, she wore a charcoal coat, her silver blonde hair cut neatly along her jaw, her blue eyes calm enough to make powerful men reconsider every careless word. She did not ask why Caroline had returned. She simply opened her arms. Caroline stepped into them carefully. For one breath, she was not a wife, an engineer, an heiress, or a mother protecting an unborn child. She was a granddaughter who had stayed away too long. "I should have called sooner," Caroline whispered. Margaret rested one hand against her platinum blonde hair. "You called when silence became dangerous." They descended beneath the executive tower into a private boardroom built inside Atlas Crown's first surviving furnace chamber. Warm metal, machine oil, and old stone gave the underground room the scent of work rather than wealth. At the far end of the table stood the chair that had belonged to Caroline's mother. No one had used it since her death. Margaret placed 4 items before Caroline. The original Aegis Lock patent, a certificate confirming her 64% voting control, records of the contracts that had quietly kept Mercer structural systems alive, and an emergency suspension order covering every Atlas license, payment, and pending agreement connected to Lucas. "Sign this," Margaret said, touching the final document, "and his access to our technology, suppliers, and money ends before sunrise." Caroline stared at the signature line. For one heartbeat, revenge looked clean. She imagined Lucas waking to frozen agreements and unanswered calls. She imagined Delaney discovering that the empire she expected to enter had already closed its doors. Then Caroline opened the sealed letter resting beneath the patent. Her mother's handwriting crossed the page like a voice returning through fire. One sentence had been underlined twice. Power is not measured by what you can destroy. It is measured by what remains safe because you acted. Caroline placed both hands over her belly. If we cut them off tonight, they will erase records, blame employees, and hide the substituted components. Margaret watched her closely. What do you want? An independent audit. Freeze document access, not payroll. Shield the inspectors, machinists, drivers, and payroll staff who followed the rules. Send inspection teams to every Lakefront line installation before morning. Preserve the shipping data. And give federal counsel the forged assignment, the warehouse records, and the altered certifications. Margaret's expression did not soften, but pride moved through it like light beneath ice. Caroline had returned with enough power to destroy Lucas. Instead, she spent that authority on passengers and workers who might never recognize her face. At 2:40 in the morning, portable spectrometer readings confirmed that the connections installed along the elevated curve did not match the certified alloy. The Transit Authority then suspended test operations under its own safety powers and authorized a controlled inspection run. Caroline joined engineers at sunrise, not as an heiress, but as the inventor who understood how Aegis Lock should respond under load. Inside an empty test car, Raymond heard the uneven rhythm before the sensors flagged it. The train stopped. Beneath the curve, inspectors found abnormal movement at 3 substituted connections. That field evidence transformed a suspicious shipment into an urgent public safety case. The authority convened an emergency technical session that afternoon. Union representatives, city engineers, and accessibility advocates joined the discussion because a prolonged shutdown would affect workers, students, older riders, and people with disabilities. Caroline presented only the engineering facts. She did not mention her marriage or Lucas's affair. Raymond described the sound beneath the wheels and explained why repeated vibration could enlarge microscopic defects over time. The authority voted to suspend the opening schedule, preserve all installed components, and create replacement bus routes before announcing the delay. For Caroline, that vote mattered more than any boardroom entrance. It showed that public safety did not depend on one powerful woman revealing a secret identity. It depended on institutions listening when evidence spoke. Full laboratory testing would follow, but the first truth was already undeniable. Someone had redirected the original components and built an entire supply chain to conceal it. Margaret rested a hand on the empty chair. Your mother waited her whole life to know what kind of leader you would become. Caroline sat down, the blue-black steel key cold against her throat. Then let Lucas present his contract tomorrow, she said. I want every lie standing when the truth enters the room. The chair at the head of Atlas Crown Steel's boardroom had no nameplate. Lucas noticed it the moment he entered, because empty power had always attracted him. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's morning skyline rose through gray rain, while elevated trains curved between towers below. Inside, 12 directors waited around a black steel table, their folders closed, their expressions unreadable. Delaney walked beside Lucas in a wine-red suit, carrying the presentation that was supposed to save Mercer's structural systems. She looked composed, but her fingers tightened around the folder whenever someone mentioned the controlling shareholder. Lucas adjusted his cuff links and reminded himself that Caroline's departure had been theater. The driver's greeting had to be arranged. The suspended license had to be temporary. His pregnant wife could not possibly control the $31 billion empire whose approval he needed to survive. Ladies and gentlemen, Lucas began, placing both hands on the table. Mercer Structural Systems is prepared to deliver the safest, most advanced connection system in modern transit. His voice filled the room with practiced certainty. Behind him, the screen displayed the Lakefront Rapid Line beneath a digital sunrise. Trains moved smoothly through animated stations while families smiled from spotless platforms. Lucas described Aegis Lock as the result of years of research conducted by his company. He spoke of innovation, public trust, and structural integrity. Each stolen phrase belonged to Caroline before he claimed it. Delaney advanced the financial projections. We have strong support from individuals close to Atlas ownership, she said. The controlling shareholder has remained outside daily operations and will not be attending. A director near the window slowly removed his glasses. You are certain? Delaney smiled. Completely. The steel doors opened behind her. No announcement came first. Only the measured sound of heels crossing polished stone. Caroline entered wearing an ivory maternity suit, her platinum blonde hair gathered into a low knot. The blue-black steel key rested against her throat. She carried no briefcase. She needed none. Every director turned toward her. Lucas's mouth went dry. What are you doing here? He demanded. Delaney recovered first. This is a confidential session. Security, remove her. No one moved. Caroline continued toward the empty chair, one hand supporting her 8-month belly. Lucas forced a laugh that sounded too sharp in the silent room. Caroline, whatever performance you arranged, take it outside. Atlas Crown's general counsel stood. One by one, the directors followed. Mr. Mercer, he said, allow me to introduce Caroline Elise Monroe Mercer, controlling shareholder and incoming chair of Atlas Crown Steel. Delaney's pen struck the floor. Lucas stared at Caroline, then at the directors standing in respect. The woman he had called dependent owned 64% of the company whose contract could save him. That is impossible, he whispered. Caroline stopped beside the empty chair while Atlas Crown's outside counsel placed certified trust records, the original patent registration, and a notarized board resolution on the table. Copies had already been provided to Lucas's attorneys that morning. No, Caroline said. It was simply inconvenient for you to notice. She sat, and only then did the board resume their seats. Lucas remained standing because no one invited him to do otherwise. Caroline looked toward the screen, where her invention still appeared beneath Mercer's logo. Continue, she said. Explain how you developed my work. Lucas opened his mouth, but no words came. Caroline touched the control beside her chair. His presentation vanished. A photograph of the Lakefront Rapid line appeared, surrounded by inspection barriers. Beneath it, red letters burned across the screen. Service opening suspended. Material review in progress. A second screen showed the Transit Authority's independent inspection notice and the sensor readings from the dawn test. This was not a private corporation pretending to control a public railway. The agency responsible for passenger safety had made its own decision after reviewing verified evidence. Delaney turned toward Lucas, her confidence finally cracking. Caroline met her husband's eyes. Now, she said, let us discuss what you were willing to place beneath 100,000 passengers. The first evidence file opened before Lucas could manufacture another denial. A certified Atlas purchase order filled the boardroom screen, listing Aegis Lock connections for the Lakefront Rapid line. Beside it appeared the shipping records. The original components had left the Atlas mill under armed tracking. They had never reached the project. Instead, the shipment was redirected to an abandoned warehouse near the Calumet River, while inferior connections arrived under Mercer Structural Systems authorization. Procurement handles deliveries, Lucas said quickly. I cannot inspect every truck. Caroline touched the control beside her chair. His electronic signature appeared beneath the substitution request, verified by date, location, and device identification. Lucas's jaw tightened. Someone used my credentials. Then your own voice may help, Caroline replied. The compliance officer first displayed the written recording policy and Lucas's signed annual acknowledgement. Executive material substitution meetings were recorded with notice to every participant. Only then did an audio file begin playing through the ceiling speakers. Lucas sounded calm, impatient, unmistakable. Use the replacement joints. The line is over-engineered. They only need to survive inspection until Atlas signs the contract. The recording ended. Rain moved against the windows like whispered judgment. Delaney's face lost its color. Lucas turned toward her. You recorded me? The compliance system records executive approvals automatically, she said. Caroline advanced the presentation. The next slide revealed the supplier behind the substituted material, North Shore Alloy Partners, hidden beneath 3 shell corporations and controlled through a private trust belonging to Delaney. Millions had moved from Mercer Structural Systems into that network. From there, the money paid for a lakefront residence purchased under Lucas's and Delaney's names. Their affair had become more than betrayal. It had become infrastructure. Delaney rose so quickly her chair struck the floor. Lucas approved every transfer, she said. He demanded higher margins because the company was collapsing. Lucas stared at her as though dishonesty became offensive only when directed at him. You promised the material met minimum standards. You told me nobody would test it twice. Their alliance fractured before the board, each accusation exposing another concealed decision. Caroline watched without satisfaction. That unsettled Lucas more than anger would have. She had not returned to humiliate him. She had returned because thousands of strangers would soon travel above steel he had weakened. Laboratory images appeared next. Cut samples showed internal defects, inconsistent alloy composition, and fatigue resistance far below the approved specification. One director gripped the table. His daughter used that route to reach work every morning. Has the line opened? Raymond Ellis, seated beside the authorities' counsel, leaned forward. His hands carried the scars of 4 decades around machines, and his voice carried no drama. Not to the public, he said. And it will not open until every suspect connection is removed, tested, and independently certified. The director looked from Raymond to Caroline and understood that the answer did not depend on family wealth. It depended on people willing to stop a schedule, he asked. No, Caroline said. Service was suspended before passengers were allowed aboard. Every unsafe connection will be removed and independently tested. Atlas will cover emergency replacement costs while investigators determine liability. Relief entered the room, followed by something heavier. Respect. Caroline had protected the people Lucas had reduced to acceptable risk. She also confirmed that innocent employees would continue receiving wages through an emergency Atlas payroll fund while the courts reviewed Mercer's accounts. Lucas looked around for sympathy, leverage, anything he could still claim. Then desperation sharpened his eyes. Those Atlas assets supported our marriage, he said. Her shares, her trust, every investment she made in Mercer, they were commingled. I will ask the court to stop her from transferring anything into a trust for our child. The room went still. Caroline placed both hands over her unborn daughter. Lucas had lost his contract, his lover, and the story he told about himself. Yet he was still reaching for ownership. Caroline met his eyes. Then bring your claim, she said. And I will bring the records. 4 weeks later, Caroline entered the federal courthouse beneath a ceiling of cold white stone, one hand supporting her back and the other resting over the daughter Lucas had already tried to turn into leverage. Outside, reporters crowded the steps. Inside, 2 legal battles waited in separate rooms. The federal injunction hearing began that morning. A temporary divorce finance hearing would take place in Illinois Domestic Relations Court 2 days later. Lucas arrived in a charcoal suit with 3 attorneys and the controlled expression he once wore when lenders questioned his numbers. Delaney entered through a side door beside federal prosecutors and her own counsel. She did not look at him. Atlas Crown Steel's attorney began with dates, not betrayal. The original Aegis Lock patent had been registered 3 years before Caroline met Lucas. Her 64% voting trust had been established before the marriage. The Atlas shares had never entered a joint account, secured a marital loan, or appeared on any shared tax schedule. Then came the forged transfer. A forensic examiner showed how Caroline's signature had been copied from prenatal insurance documents and placed onto the patent assignment. Lucas's attorney rose. This is a divorce dispute disguised as corporate warfare. The judge looked over his glasses. Forgery does not become marital because the victim is a wife. The courtroom went silent. Shipping records followed. Altered certifications. Shell companies. Electronic transfers. The properly noticed compliance recording in which Lucas approved the replacement joints. Delaney then took the witness stand under a cooperation agreement. Her voice remained steady until the prosecutor asked who knew the substituted material failed Atlas specifications. Lucas Mercer, she said. Lucas turned toward her with disbelief, as though betrayal had become unacceptable only after reaching him. Delaney admitted controlling North Shore Alloy Partners. She admitted hiding the supplier relationship and using the profits to purchase the Lakefront residence. He said the line was over-engineered, she testified. He said nobody would inspect twice. By noon, the federal judge barred Mercer Structural Systems from using Aegis Lock, froze disputed licensing revenue, ordered preservation of all company records, and referred the fraud evidence for criminal prosecution. The order was civil and temporary. It did not declare Lucas guilty. Prosecutors were conducting a separate investigation, and any criminal charges would require their own process, evidence, and review. 2 days later, Lucas tried a different argument in Illinois Domestic Relations Court. His attorney claimed Caroline's Atlas wealth had been commingled because she had helped Mercer survive and used private funds during the marriage. Caroline's attorney placed 7 years of ledgers before the judge. Every payment had been documented as a separate investment or corporate loan. The court allowed discovery on ordinary marital claims, but found no basis to freeze the Atlas Voting Trust or prevent Caroline from establishing an independently administered trust for her daughter. Lucas could litigate legitimate financial questions. He could not turn uncertainty into control. No Atlas shares had changed ownership. No trust funds had entered marital accounts. The judge rejected Lucas's request to restrict Caroline from creating a protected trust for their daughter. "A child is not a doorway into the mother's separate estate," she said. When invited to speak, Caroline stood slowly. She wore no diamonds, only the blue-black steel key at her throat. "I hid my inheritance because I wanted to know whether he loved me without it," she said. "I never imagined he would use my silence to pretend everything I built belonged to him." Lucas lowered his eyes. "I did not come here to turn a divorce into a criminal offense. I came because of forged transfer, unsafe components, and an attempt to control my daughter's future requires separate, lawful answers." The rulings came one after another. The patent remained Caroline's. The voting trust remained protected. Lucas had no claim to Atlas shares or future gifts placed in trust for the child. When the gavel fell, Delaney walked past him without turning. Lucas called Caroline's name once as she approached the courthouse doors. She paused, but did not look back. Behind her stood a man surrounded by lawyers, cameras, and silence. The first things in his life his confidence could no longer command. 14 months later, the first Lakefront Rapid Line train entered Monroe Station beneath a clear Chicago morning. No champagne waited on the platform. No orchestra played. Families stood behind the safety line holding coffee, backpacks, and the ordinary trust Lucas had once treated like an acceptable risk. Caroline watched from the crowd with 13-month-old Hope Margaret Monroe resting against her shoulder, wrapped in a pale blue coat. Above them, every Aegis Lock connection had been replaced, independently tested, and verified by engineers who answered to public safety rather than executive ambition. The opening came only after the Transit Authority, an outside laboratory, and a panel of independent engineers signed separate certifications. Raymond rode in the first car beside a group of apprentices. When the train entered the repaired curve, he closed his eyes and listened. The rhythm was even. Caroline had officially become chair of Atlas Crown Steel 3 months after Hope's birth. She refused the ceremonial portrait plan for her first morning and walked the mill instead, speaking with welders, inspectors, drivers, and night shift supervisors. Under her leadership, Atlas created an independent safety division with authority to stop any project without executive approval. She established legal protection for whistleblowers, scholarships for steelworkers' children, and a recovery fund for women rebuilding their lives after financial betrayal. Power, Caroline had learned, meant nothing unless it made ordinary people safer. Lucas eventually accepted a guilty plea involving wire fraud, theft of trade secrets, falsified safety certifications, and conspiracy to conceal substandard materials. Mercer Structural Systems entered court-supervised restructuring. Its profitable contracts were transferred to new management, damaged suppliers were repaid, and innocent employees kept their jobs. Delaney's cooperation reduced her sentence, but the Lakefront residence, hidden accounts, and shell companies were seized. Neither she nor Lucas attended the opening of the line they had nearly compromised. Caroline did not attend Lucas's sentencing. She had already spent enough time allowing his decisions to set the schedule of her life. She was inside the new Transit Safety Center, signing the final documents for a worker reporting program named after her mother. On the wall behind her hung no family crest. Only a narrow steel plaque carried one sentence. Power is measured by what remains safe because you acted. At Monroe Station, reporters searched for a victory speech. They wanted Caroline to describe the moment Lucas learned who she was, the instant Delaney turned against him, or the courtroom silence after the judge rejected his claims. Caroline gave them none of it. She watched a little boy press his face against the train window while his father lifted a hand from the platform. Doors closed. Warning lights flashed. The train moved smoothly into the curve where inspectors had discovered the first defective connections. A reporter stepped closer. "Ms. Monroe, do you feel you took everything from your former husband?" Cameras turned. The question drifted beneath the steel canopy as hope stirred against Caroline's shoulder. Caroline looked toward the departing train, then down at her daughter's small hand curled around the edge of her coat. "No," she said. "I only took back what he was never entitled to use." She walked away before another question could turn dignity into entertainment. Margaret waited near the station entrance, silver hair moving in the lake wind. She touched Hope's cheek, then looked toward the tracks. No congratulations were necessary. Some victories arrive as applause. The ones that matter most arrive as trains that reach home safely. That evening, Caroline carried Hope through the quiet house she had chosen near Lake Michigan. She removed the blue-black steel key and fastened it to a keepsake box beside her mother's letter. Her wedding ring had been melted into a small star above Hope's crib. Outside, the lakefront trains crossed the city in lines of silver light. Lucas had believed power meant owning every door. Caroline proved it meant knowing which ones must remain safe for everyone. This story is fictional. Names, characters, companies, locations, and events are created or dramatized for entertainment purposes.